The first thing no one tells you about widowhood isn't the paperwork or the sympathy cards or the casseroles left on your porch. It's the sound of the house when it's finally quiet. Not a soft, comforting quiet, not the kind you wrap around yourself like a warm shawl. No, this silence is cold, heavy. It follows you like a shadow you never invited. It doesn't weep. It doesn't call out. It just lingers in doorways, in empty chairs, in the pauses between each heartbeat. My husband passed away 11 years ago. He was the only man I ever truly loved, and I had known him since I was just a girl of 16. We were married for 42 years. People say that's a blessing, and it is. But what they don't say is that when you spend 4 decades with someone, you don't just lose them, you lose a part of yourself too. The part that laughed with them, argued with them, whispered secrets in the dark, and held their hand through doctor visits and long Sunday afternoons. His passing wasn't sudden. It was slow, a quiet unraveling. The kind of illness that creeps into your lives like a soft fog. At first, we tried to pretend it wasn't serious. He still made his jokes, still read the newspaper every morning, still told me he loved me at night. But little by little, he stopped walking as far. Then he stopped driving. Then he stopped eating the dinners I cooked. Then, one morning, I held his hand and I knew. He was leaving. I kissed his forehead. I told him I'd be okay. I believed that in the moment, because he needed to hear it. And I needed to believe it. But time has a way of stretching grief, of making promises feel small. In the days after, the house filled with flowers and visitors and the sound of old stories. I smiled. I thanked people. I kept busy because keeping busy was the only way to stop from collapsing. Everyone says the first few weeks are the hardest. But they're wrong. The hardest part comes after everyone else has returned to their lives. When the last dish has been washed, when the guest bed is empty again, when you wake up and realize you don't have to make breakfast for anyone. That's when the real silence begins. I didn't crumble. That's not who I am. I was raised by a mother who believed in neat corners and clean linens and facing pain with dignity. I did what she would have done, cleaned out his closet, boxed up his books, folded his sweaters with shaking hands. I didn't do it to forget. I did it because the stillness was easier when I was moving. I put his photos in frames and placed them around the house. Not too many. Just enough to keep him with me, but not so many that I couldn't breathe. For over a decade, I lived alone. At first, I told myself it was temporary. That one of the kids might move in. That I'd travel. That I'd fill my days with hobbies and clubs and volunteering. And I did for a while. I joined a book club. I knitted blankets for the church. I took long walks and stopped to admire flower beds I used to ignore. But none of it filled the quiet. The kids checked in. Birthdays, holidays, the occasional Sunday dinner. But they had their own lives and I didn't want to be a burden. So I smiled when they called and said they couldn't make it. I told them I understood. Because I did. Because I remember what it's like to be busy, to be stretched thin by the needs of the world. But inside, I missed them. I missed noise. I missed mess. I missed someone leaving a coffee mug in the sink and someone else asking if there were any clean towels. And then came the nights. The long, aching nights. I would make myself a cup of tea and sit in the kitchen without turning on the lights. Just listening to the hum of the refrigerator and the wind against the windows. I wondered if other women my age felt the same. If behind their smiles at church and their polite laughter at luncheons, they too were waiting for someone to knock on the door and say, "I missed you." I wasn't searching for love. Truly, I wasn't. I had had a great love. A faithful love. I didn't think I had space for another. But I missed being known. Not admired. Not entertained. Just known. I miss someone remembering how I like my tea. Someone noticing when I was quiet for too long. Someone holding my hand not out of duty, but because it felt right. Then one Tuesday afternoon, I found myself in a small secondhand bookstore. It's a quiet place, not far from the post office. I wandered through the aisles, not looking for anything in particular. Just breathing in the scent of old pages and floor polish. I reached for a poetry book, and so did he. Our fingers brushed. He apologized. I laughed. We started talking. About Yeats. About the weather. About nothing at all. His name was Richard. A retired teacher. A widower, too. His voice was gentle, not weak, but soft in the way old leather is soft. And his eyes carried something familiar. A kind of knowing. We talked for almost an hour that day, standing in the poetry aisle like two students who had nowhere better to be. When I left, he asked if he could walk me to my car. I said yes. And as I drove away, I realized something I hadn't felt in years. I didn't want to go back to an empty house. Nothing happened that day. No promises. No exchanged phone numbers. Just a conversation. But it was enough to shift something inside me. A small flicker. A whisper. A question. What if I'm not done yet? Because maybe, just maybe, even after all the loss, even after all the quiet, life wasn't finished with me. I wasn't planning to go back to the bookstore. It wasn't part of some romantic notion or hopeful fantasy. It was just Thursday, and the silence in my house had been louder than usual. So I went. I wandered again through the familiar aisles, pretending to look for something. But I think a part of me was hoping for someone. And there he was in the same spot, poetry section, reading with his glasses halfway down his nose like he hadn't moved since Tuesday. He looked up and smiled. "I was hoping you'd come back," he said, not in a flirty way, but in the honest, gentle tone of someone who's not afraid of honesty anymore. And I felt myself smiling in return, not because I felt young again, but because for the first time in years, I felt seen. We sat that day in the little reading nook near the back of the store, surrounded by dust and forgotten novels, and talked about everything but ourselves. He mentioned a poem about longing that stuck with him since college. I told him about a line from a novel that once made me cry in a grocery store. We shared coffee from paper cups and a silence that didn't feel heavy. He was like that, Richard. He didn't talk over people. He didn't fill quiet spaces with noise. He just let them exist. Like grief, like time, like the past. In the weeks that followed, we began meeting more regularly. Not because we made plans, but because our paths kept accidentally crossing. The same coffee shop, the same park bench near the lake, the same corner of the library on rainy mornings. It became a pattern neither of us dared to name. It took a month before I told my children I had met someone. I wasn't sure what I expected, perhaps cautious joy, maybe even a little worry. But I didn't expect silence. Not the comfortable kind, but the one that comes with judgment hanging in the air like thunderclouds. My daughter, the oldest, was the first to respond. "Mom," she said, trying to stay calm, "are you serious?" After Dad, the question wasn't really a question. It was an accusation wrapped in concern. I tried to explain that it wasn't about replacing anyone. That grief doesn't mean you stop living. That even at 68, a heart still needs to be heard. But she didn't understand. Or maybe she didn't want to. Richard never pressured me. He never asked for more than I was ready to give. He never expected a title or a timeline. He brought me flowers once, small daisies, not roses. He said roses felt too young for us. But daisies, he said, they're sturdy, resilient. Like you. We didn't go dancing or have candlelit dinners. We walked. We talked. We watched birds. He held my hand when we crossed the street. He wrote me notes and left them in library books. And I felt alive again. Not in the way young lovers do, all fire and urgency, but in the way old souls do, quiet warmth, like sunlight on closed eyelids. Still, I struggled. There were nights I sat in bed holding a photo of my late husband, asking him silently if I was doing something wrong, if I was betraying our memories, if he'd be angry. But the truth is, the man I loved, the man who loved me, would never want me to suffer in silence for the rest of my days. He used to say, "If I go first, I want you to keep living, not just surviving." And I wasn't sure I had ever truly lived until I met Richard. He asked me to dinner one Saturday. Not just coffee or a walk, but a real dinner at a quiet restaurant where the waiters knew when not to interrupt. I said yes, though I wore the same blue dress I'd worn to my husband's memorial, because I didn't know how else to honor both men at once. Over dinner, Richard asked if I believed in second chances. I said yes, but only if they came softly. And he laughed and said, "Then I'll whisper mine." He didn't propose that night. That came much later. But something shifted between us. We began speaking of the future in shared terms. We instead of you and I. We started planning trips. Small ones. Museums. Gardens. Just enough to look ahead. But the children, they were polite but distant. My daughter, especially. She couldn't understand how her mother, the woman who wore her wedding ring for 10 years after her husband's death, could love again. She never said it out loud. But her absence did. Richard told me not to rush. He said, "You don't owe anyone an explanation for your joy." But I still wrote long letters I never sent, hoping one day my children would see me not as a traitor to their father's memory, but as a woman who had survived it. There was a moment, a few months later, when Richard gave me a small wooden box. Inside was a single note. No ring. No grand gesture. Just a piece of paper with his careful handwriting. "Would you like to spend the rest of our lives walking together?" I cried. Not because I was unsure, but because no one had asked me that gently in a very long time. I said yes. Quietly. As softly as he had asked. And in that moment, the silence that had haunted my home for years finally broke. Love at 70 does not arrive like a whirlwind. It does not sweep you off your feet or come with the urgency of youth. It does not knock you over with fire or consume you with passion. It comes gently, almost shyly, as if it, too, knows it must be careful with a heart that has already weathered so many seasons. At this age, love does not beg to be seen. It simply asks to be understood. With Richard, love came like the sun rising after a long winter. Not sudden, not loud, just steady, quiet, warming the corners of my life I had forgotten were cold. We did not fall in love the way people often describe it. We grew into it, like old trees leaning gently toward each other, sharing the same earth, the same sky, the same understanding that time is both precious and fleeting. Our days were simple, but in that simplicity, we found something profound. On Sunday mornings, we would share the crossword puzzle and take turns reading aloud the clues. He always read them with exaggerated seriousness, and I would pretend to roll my eyes, though I secretly loved it. On Tuesday afternoons, we would visit the little flower market near the church, not to buy anything in particular, but to walk among the colors, to breathe in the scent of life blooming again. And on Thursdays, we walked the lake path not to exercise, but to move together, to notice the birds, the way the light hit the water, the quiet that wasn't lonely anymore. Richard had a way of being present without ever intruding. He didn't try to fix my grief. He never once told me to move on or to forget. He understood, perhaps more than anyone ever had, that healing is not a destination, but a slow unfolding. One evening, as we sat on his porch watching the sky change colors, he said, "Grief doesn't end. It just softens. And in the space where it softens, something new can grow." And something did grow. Slowly, carefully, tenderly. We did not talk about forever. At our age, forever is a word we hold with reverence, but not with illusion. We know that bones break easier, memories fade quicker, and mornings come with a stiffness we did not invite. But still we planned. Not grand adventures, but small promises. A garden we could tend together. A book we would read aloud, chapter by chapter. A Sunday soup recipe we would keep tweaking until it tasted like home. There's a sweetness in that kind of love, the kind that doesn't rush, doesn't demand. It simply is. Present. Steady. Unafraid of silence. One night, during a power outage, we lit candles and sat together in the living room. I remember looking at him across the flickering light and saying, "Sometimes I still feel guilty for being happy again." He didn't answer right away. He reached across, took my hand, and said, "Happiness doesn't betray memory. It honors survival." Those words stayed with me. They gave me permission to feel joy without apology, to smile without shame, to love without feeling like I had stolen something from the past. Still, not everyone understood, especially not my children. My son was quiet, hesitant, but ultimately kind. He asked questions, listened to my answers, and while he didn't quite grasp the depth of what Richard meant to me, he didn't fight it. My daughter, on the other hand, grew more distant. There was a wall between us I didn't know how to climb. She never said it out loud, but I could feel it, the unspoken belief that by loving again, I was somehow erasing her father. She didn't come to the house as often. Our phone calls became shorter. There was always a reason, a work meeting, the kids' soccer game, a headache, but I knew. I knew what she wasn't saying. It hurt. In a way I wasn't prepared for. Because as much as I had braced myself for grief, for loneliness, I had not expected joy to come with its own kind of pain. The pain of being misunderstood, of being judged for choosing to keep living, of watching your own child look at you like a stranger. Richard never pushed me to confront her. He said, "Let love lead, not guilt." And so I waited. I sent postcards from places we visited. I left messages when she didn't answer. I wrote letters I never mailed. Letters where I told her that I still loved her father, that I always would. That Richard did not replace anyone, but simply held a new space in my heart. A space I didn't know was still open. And still, despite the silence, I chose to keep loving. Because love, in this season of life, is not about being understood by everyone. It's about being known by someone. Fully. Gently. Without pretense or condition. Richard and I made a home in each other. Not a house, not a ceremony, just a rhythm. A way of being. I would boil the water for tea. He would butter the toast. I would fold the laundry. He would hum old songs off key. We moved like old dancers who had learned each other's steps without rehearsal. And on days when the world felt too loud or too harsh, we simply sat side by side, hands resting, hearts open, and let the stillness speak. There was one moment, quiet and unremarkable, that I will carry with me forever. We were in the garden. He was trimming the rosemary bush, and I was watching a butterfly land on a stone. He turned to me, wiped his brow, and said, "You make even the ordinary feel like a gift." I laughed, thinking it was just a sweet thing to say. But then I saw his eyes, and I knew he meant it. That's what this love was. Not fireworks, not declarations, but a daily choosing. A quiet celebration of life's small moments. A grace I hadn't known I needed until it found me. We didn't rush. Because there was no need. We weren't racing toward anything. We were simply walking together toward whatever time we had left, grateful for every step. And in that slow, patient journey, I discovered something I had never dared to hope for, that even after loss, even after the ache of goodbye, love can return. Not the same love, but no less true. The day I told my children was not some grand announcement. There was no dramatic pause, no carefully crafted speech. It was a Sunday, the kind that still carried the memory of family dinners long past. I had made a small roast, set the table with the usual dishes, and lit the same candlelight always lit when I wanted to feel like their father was still near. It had been years since he passed, but on Sundays, I still dressed like he'd be home by 6. They both arrived with their own lives tucked under their arms. My son with his wife and quiet smile. My daughter with her perfectly styled hair and thin lips pressed into polite formality. The grandkids ran into the house as if they remembered being small here, though so much time had passed. We sat, we ate, we talked about things that didn't matter, soccer practice, someone's promotion, a leaky faucet. But all the while, my heart beat too loudly, as if it were trying to speak before I did. After dessert, when the dishes had been cleared and the room had settled into that soft post-meal stillness, I folded my hands in my lap and said, "There's someone I want you to meet." The room didn't fall silent, not exactly. But it changed. Like the air shifted. My son looked at me, cautious but kind. My daughter blinked twice, then reached for her water glass with mechanical precision. I continued softly. "His name is Richard. We've been seeing each other. It's not new, but I didn't want to say anything until I was sure it was something real." My daughter set her glass down too carefully. "How long?" she asked, not angrily, just tightly. "Almost a year," I said. She inhaled sharply through her nose. My son raised his eyebrows, looked at me, then at her. "Are you happy, Mom?" he asked. I smiled at him, grateful. "Yes. I didn't think I would be again. But I am. In a quiet, steady way. He's kind. He listens. He makes me feel like I'm still here." My daughter didn't speak. Not right away. She stared at the tablecloth, the one I had embroidered when I was pregnant with her. Then, in a voice just barely above a whisper, she said, I didn't think you'd move on. The words landed like stones in my chest. I'm not moving on from your father, I said. I'm moving with him. His memory is not erased by Richard. If anything, it's honored. Every morning I wake up and think of your dad, and every night I light that candle. But the years keep going, sweetheart. And I didn't know how lonely I had become until someone gently pulled me back into life. She looked at me then, really looked, and I saw it, not anger, but hurt. Not resentment, but confusion. Her eyes shimmered with something soft and broken. It's just hard, she said. You were his. I nodded. And I still am, in the way that memory never leaves us. But I'm also still me. And there are parts of me that didn't die with him. I want to live those parts fully while I still can. She excused herself to the bathroom. When she returned, her makeup was untouched, but her silence had changed. Less sharp, more lost. My son helped clear the dishes. On his way out, he hugged me longer than usual. He whispered, I'm proud of you, Mom. You're brave. And then they were gone. That night, I sat alone in the living room, the candles still flickering. I held the picture of my husband that always sat on the mantel and whispered, I hope you understand. I hope you'd be glad I'm not alone. A week passed before I heard from my daughter. She sent a text, can we talk sometime? Just us? We met at the park, the one where she used to take her own kids to feed the ducks. She arrived with coffee and no agenda. We sat on a bench, shoulder to shoulder, and I let the silence grow comfortable before I said, I didn't mean to hurt you. I know, she said quickly. It's just, I always saw you as this eternal thing. Mom and Dad. A unit. Unbreakable. And now that unit has changed. It's like, I'm losing part of what kept the world steady. I understand, I said. But even the steadiest things bend. And if they don't, they break. She nodded slowly. I don't know how to feel. I don't want to resent him, Richard. I just don't know how to make space for him. You don't have to love him like I do, I said gently. But maybe, in time, you can let him stand beside me. Not instead of your father, but with me in the space where healing lives. She was quiet a moment, then said, Will you bring him to Sunday dinner? My heart jumped, then steadied. Only if you're ready. I think I need to see him. Not just the idea of him. And so, a week later, Richard came to dinner. He brought a simple bottle of wine, wore a navy sweater that I knew he picked carefully, and brought with him the quiet confidence of a man who understands the importance of taking small steps in other people's homes. He didn't try too hard. He didn't tell jokes or talk about himself. He listened. He asked questions. He offered to dry the dishes. At the end of the evening, as he was helping my daughter hang up coats, she looked him in the eye and said, I'm still figuring this out. He smiled gently. Me too, he said. And that was enough. Later, as we sat in the kitchen sipping tea, Richard took my hand under the table and whispered, You didn't just survive, my dear. You carried everyone else through it. And for the first time since my husband's funeral, I felt whole again. Not because I had found a replacement, but because I had been brave enough to open my heart again, even when it was still tender. Love doesn't erase grief. It walks beside it. And sometimes, it helps carry it when it gets too heavy. I was no longer just a widow. I was a woman living, loving, hoping again. And the world, for all its broken pieces, felt somehow stitched together in a new and beautiful way. It began with the little things. The sort of things you chalk up to aging, a missed appointment here, a word forgotten there, a slow unsteadiness that made the walk to the mailbox feel just a bit longer than it used to. Richard would laugh them off at first. Getting old is just a scavenger hunt for your memory, he'd say, chuckling, but I could see the flicker of concern in his eyes before he turned away. Then came the cough that wouldn't go away, the bruises that appeared too easily, the tiredness that lingered even after a full night's sleep. I knew that look, the one a body gives before it admits something isn't right. I had seen it in my husband. I had seen it in the mirror during his final months. And now, I saw it in Richard. He resisted the doctor at first. Don't fuss, he told me, I'm just slowing down. But slowing down shouldn't have come with breathlessness after climbing 4 steps. It shouldn't have meant naps that stretched into forgotten dinners or shaking hands that spilled the tea we once poured so carefully. When the diagnosis came, it didn't shout. It arrived quietly with a clipboard and a sigh. Leukemia. Advanced. Aggressive. I remember sitting beside him in the cold, too-white hospital room, the air thick with unspoken words. He looked at the doctor, then at me, and simply said, "So this is how it goes." I squeezed his hand and whispered, "Not yet. Not if I have anything to say about it." There's a cruel familiarity to illness when you've already walked that path. You know the waiting rooms too well. The smells, the soft tap of shoes against tile floors. The way time slows when you're holding onto someone else's strength with both hands. I became his person. His ride to chemo. His morning voice of encouragement. His late night watcher when the fevers came. I cooked, I cleaned. I kept track of medication schedules and hydration levels and blood counts written in a trembling hand on a pad of paper beside the bed. I slept on a chair more nights than I can count. And through it all, he never once asked, "Why me?" He only ever asked, "Are you okay?" Sometimes I lied and said yes. Sometimes I told the truth and cried in his arms, even when he was the one with the 4 in his vein. There's a sacredness in caretaking that no one talks about. A holy ache. You're not just holding someone up, you're holding back your own fear, your exhaustion, your grief in waiting. And all while pretending that tomorrow is still just another Tuesday, not a countdown. Richard's daughter lived in another state. She came to visit twice, once near the beginning, when there was still hope, and again when the doctors began to speak in softer voices and avoid making eye contact. She thanked me both times for being there for him. But I could see in her eyes that she didn't understand why it had to be me. Why this new woman, this late-in-life companion, was the one holding her father's hand. But I didn't do it for understanding. I did it for love. Even in illness, Richard tried to give more than he took. On days when he could barely sit upright, he'd ask me about my garden. Are the roses blooming? Did the squirrels get into the bird feeder again? He'd nod, eyes closed, as if the stories gave him breath. And maybe they did. One afternoon, when the house was quiet and the light was golden, he asked me to bring him something from the top drawer of his nightstand. I found a letter sealed, with my name in his handwriting. "I wrote it last week," he said. "In case I forget to say everything I need to." I opened it only after he fell asleep. It was simple. It wasn't poetic. But it was him. "I know I didn't give you forever. But I hope I gave you peace. I hope you felt safe in my presence. I hope you know you gave me a second life I never expected, and I am more grateful than words will ever hold. If this is the end, know I go smiling because you were at my side." I wept into that letter. Not because he was dying, but because even in dying, he was thinking of me. There were nights, quiet, unbearably still nights, when I sat beside him as he slept, watching his chest rise and fall, counting each breath like a prayer. And I would ask God not to take him yet, not because I wasn't ready to lose him, but because he deserved one more spring, one more morning coffee, one more walk by the lake. But prayers are not bargaining chips. They are offerings. And mine were laid gently on the altar of time we couldn't control. The decline came faster than we thought it would. In the last week, he stopped eating, stopped speaking much. His eyes, though, remained full of light until the very end. The night before he passed, I climbed into bed beside him. I held him the way you hold a child after a nightmare, gently, protectively, as if love alone could stop the dark. He didn't say anything, but his hand found mine under the covers. That was the last thing he did. In the morning, he was gone. Not violently, not fearfully, just gone. Like a candle that finally runs out of wick, even though the flame still wanted to burn. I sat there for a long time. I don't remember crying right away. It wasn't like before, with my husband. That grief had come like a thunderclap. This one seeped in like fog. Quiet, all-encompassing, gentle, but unrelenting. And yet, even in the midst of loss, I didn't feel hollow. I felt full. Because this time, I had loved completely. I had shown up fully. I had walked every step of the journey with him, and he with me. There were no regrets. Only the ache of absence, and the beauty of what had been. That afternoon, my daughter came over. She didn't knock. She came straight in and found me sitting at the table, holding the letter he had written. She sat across from me and took my hand. "You were everything to him," she whispered. "And you were everything he needed." I nodded, unable to speak. We sat like that for hours. Not talking, just sharing the silence. This time, not the silence of loneliness, but of remembrance, of honor, of love. And though my heart was breaking, it was also whole, because I had dared to love again. And because of that, I was not alone in grief, but surrounded by the echoes of a life well lived and a love that, though brief, was eternal in its depth. I am 68 years old, and I have loved twice. I have buried two men who kissed my forehead in the mornings and said I made their world feel less cold. I have heard the silence of a home after love has left it, and I have listened to that same silence become music again. Not loud music, but a soft, slow ballad you hum when you think no one's listening. And here, now, in the stillness that follows everything, I want to tell you what I know. Not because I am wise, but because I have been. Because I have watched life unfold with trembling hands and hopeful eyes, and I have made peace with both its cruelty and its kindness. Here's what I know now. First, love does not have an expiration date. It doesn't age out. It doesn't become invalid just because your face has lines and your body has slowed. If anything, love at this age becomes clearer, stripped of performance, no longer needing to impress. It is patient. It is deliberate. And it is earned with small gestures repeated 1,000 times. If someone tells you it's too late to fall in love again, smile and let them think that. Then go on and love anyway. Because when you've outlived youth, what's left is honesty, and honesty makes for the best kind of love. Second, grief doesn't end. It changes shape. It softens. It learns to sit beside you instead of smothering you. You do not move on. You carry it. You find space for it. You teach it how to be a quieter companion. Some days, it will still roar. That's okay. That's the price of having loved deeply. Don't curse your grief, it's proof you were brave enough to love. Third, people will misunderstand you. Especially if you choose joy after sorrow. Especially if you don't grieve the way they expect. They will ask you how you moved on so fast, why you let someone new into your life, why you laugh when you should still cry. And you must remember this. You do not owe anyone the performance of your pain. Your healing is yours alone. Fourth, your children, even grown, will always see you as mom, not as a woman, not as a person with desire or loneliness or dreams that didn't end at 40. This is not their fault, it's just the way the world sees mothers. But gently, lovingly, you must remind them, I am not just your past. I am my own future too. Fifth, loneliness is not a punishment. It's a signal. It's your soul's way of saying, please connect. And that connection might not always look like romance. It might be a friendship with your neighbor, a writing group, a Bible study, a pottery class, a weekly tea date. Seek it out. Make space for companionship, not just as a distraction, but as sacred medicine. Sixth, your body is not a betrayal. The creaking joints, the sagging skin, the extra weight, these are signs of survival. This body carried you through childbirth, through death, through sleepless nights, through decades of holding others. Speak to it kindly. Dress it in softness. Let it rest when it asks. Move it not to shrink it, but to honor it. Seventh, say what needs to be said. Do not assume they know you love them. Do not wait for the right time to forgive. Say thank you. Say I'm proud of you. Say I'm sorry. And especially say goodbye when the moment calls for it. We don't always get the perfect endings, but we can offer perfect clarity, even in imperfect circumstances. Eighth, make rituals. Light the candle. Bake the pie even if no one's coming over. Put on the good earrings. Play the song your husband used to sing in the car. Dance a little in the kitchen. The world feels more bearable when we create moments of beauty with our own hands. Ninth, you will never be done. There is no final version of you. There is no plateau where you stop becoming. Life will keep inviting you to grow, to soften, to learn again. Let it. Be curious, even at 70. Read the book. Ask the question. Say yes to the trip, even if you pack wrong and your ankles swell. Don't shrink your life because the world tells you your season has passed. Seasons come back, and so can you. And finally, forgive yourself for all the things you didn't know until now. For the years you stayed too quiet. For the love you didn't know how to hold. For the boundaries you didn't set. For the pieces of yourself you gave away without asking for anything in return. Forgive yourself, not to forget, but to begin again. Because you can begin again. I did. At 61, I fell in love. At 62, I introduced him to my children. At 63, I buried him. And at 64, I sat at this same kitchen table and realized I was still here. Still breathing. Still becoming. Some people look at my story and say, was it worth it? Loving someone again only to lose them. And I tell them, absolutely. Because even though I lost him, I gained something I never thought I would again. The reminder that I was still capable of deep love. That my heart could stretch further than I thought. That my capacity to give hadn't died with my first husband. That I was still alive, not just surviving, but alive. That is the miracle no one tells you about getting older. The heart, if you let it, keeps beating in ways you never expected. And now, at nearly 70, I sit with my tea in the early morning light, and I don't feel empty. I feel full. Not because my life turned out exactly as planned, but because I learned to live in the spaces between the plans. So if you're listening, if you're somewhere out there wondering whether it's too late to love, to laugh, to start again, let me tell you, it's not. The world still has space for your joy. And so do you. The whispers started at church. I hadn't expected them to stop and clap when I showed up again with my head held high. But I also hadn't expected the sideways glances, the forced smiles, the sudden quiet when I walked into the fellowship hall. They say she moved on fast. She buried 2 husbands and still has room to love again. That's unsettling. I heard she was with him before her first one passed. Or was it after the second? There was no end to the speculation, only a revolving door of rumors wrapped in pleasantries. At first, I pretended not to hear. I smiled. I asked about their grandkids. I brought cookies to Bible study. But inside, something began to sting. It wasn't just the strangers. It was people I had prayed beside. People who held my hand when I was freshly widowed. People who once said, "You're the strongest woman I know." Now they looked at me as if that strength had become a threat. As if my choosing to live fully, deeply, even after loss somehow offended their sense of how grief was supposed to look. And then there were the online comments. My niece had posted a photo of me holding Richard's hand in the hospital. A tender moment. A simple caption, "Love doesn't retire." Within hours, there were strangers chiming in. This is why marriages don't last anymore. People treat them like seasons, not vows. She should be ashamed. At her age, seeking attention, probably gold digging, or lonely. Either way, it's desperate. I stared at the screen, trying to remember when the world became so loud and so empty at the same time. And perhaps the cruelest moment came from someone I never expected, my own sister. At Thanksgiving, after the plates were cleared and the kids were playing, she pulled me aside in the kitchen and said, "You know, not everyone thinks what you did was appropriate. People talk." I looked at her. My own blood. The girl I once covered for when she snuck out of the house to kiss her high school sweetheart in the rain. The woman who sat with me during my first funeral, who once said, "If anyone deserves to love again, it's you." And now here she was, echoing the voices outside. I could have fought back. I could have defended every choice, listed every sleepless night, every tear wiped from Richard's face. But instead, I said the only thing that came to mind. I know people talk, but I live. That's the difference. She looked away, said nothing, and I knew then, not everyone would understand. Not everyone has to. In the weeks that followed, I began to learn something unexpected, the power of choosing peace over permission. See, we are raised, especially as women, to be palatable, to be accepted, to make sure our grief is quiet, our strength humble, our joy modest. But what no one tells you is that this becomes a prison. A life lived for the approval of others is a life slowly dissolving in silence. I had already buried 2 men I loved. I would not bury my voice too. So I started saying what I thought out loud. At dinner with friends, when someone said, I just don't get how you let yourself love again after all that pain, I replied. That pain taught me what love is. Why would I waste the lesson? At church, when a woman whispered, "Some people think it's too soon," I smiled and said, "I think it was right on time." And when my granddaughter, curious and untainted by cynicism, asked me, "Grandma, is it weird to fall in love when you're old?" I bent down and whispered, "No, honey. It's magic. Because you know exactly what to do with it. Let them talk. Let them guess, assume, judge. I no longer wear their opinions like armor. They are not my jury. They were not there when Richard reached for my hand with trembling fingers. They were not there when I whispered him to sleep. They were not there when I sat alone on a porch swing, wondering if I had it in me to try again. But I was. I was there for every beat of it. Every ache, every breath, every second of beauty carved from sorrow. And that makes me the only one qualified to decide how I carry it. Let them talk. Because while they whisper in corners and type from behind screens, I walk boldly in the open. I water my plants. I volunteer at the shelter. I hold babies at the hospital and read poetry under sunlit windows. I live. I live. And that is the loudest thing a woman my age can do. I'm not saying it's easy. Some nights, I still ache from words that weren't mine to carry. Some mornings, I catch my reflection and wonder if I've become someone people pity or someone they envy. Maybe both. Maybe neither. But here's what I do know. Every time I let someone's judgment stop me from choosing joy, I die a little. And I've already done enough dying for one lifetime. So now, I choose to live as if I am no longer waiting for permission. Because no one else lives in this body. No one else sleeps in this bed. No one else walks in my shoes, makes my tea, tends my memories. Let them talk. And I will keep walking forward. It's strange, the quiet doesn't bother you until it does. At first, I welcomed it. After decades of noise, the clatter of pots, the shouting of children, the back and forth of a husband with strong opinions, silence felt like a luxury. I could hear the clock ticking, the kettle whistling, the birds arguing in the trees. For a while, it was enough. But silence has layers. And over time, it starts to change its tone. It stops being peaceful. It becomes loud in a different way. And then it starts to ask you questions you don't want to answer. Where is everybody? When did the phone stop ringing? What happens if you fall and there's no one to help? What happens if no one notices? The fear crept in gradually. It wasn't sudden. It wasn't dramatic. It came in small moments, the kind no one ever writes about in novels. Like the time I made too much soup out of habit and realized I had no one to share it with. Or the morning I woke up from a vivid dream, reached for someone beside me, and felt only the cold sheet. It's the kind of fear that feels embarrassing to speak about, the kind that people expect you to rise above at this age. You're so strong, they say. You're so independent. They mean well. But they don't realize that strength and loneliness often sleep in the same bed. When Richard passed, I thought I had mourned. I had cried in all the expected places, the funeral, the empty house, the first holiday alone. I had gone through the rituals. I had even smiled when people said he was in a better place. But the real mourning came later. It came at 3:17 a.m. when I woke from a dream where he was brushing my hair, and I reached for that tenderness, only to find an empty room. It came when I got the flu, and no one noticed I hadn't left the house in 3 days. It came when I caught myself talking to the air, not out of madness, but out of habit, and I waited for an answer that didn't come. There's a particular fear in realizing that you are no longer part of someone's daily rhythm, that your name is no longer on anyone's list, that if you disappeared, it might take a while for the world to realize something was missing. That's the fear of growing old alone. It's not about dying, I've made peace with that. It's about being forgotten while still alive. There was a moment I'll never forget. I was at the grocery store in the checkout line. The young woman ahead of me was on the phone. She was laughing, telling someone about her weekend plans, what she was cooking, who was coming over. And for a split second, I forgot what that felt like, to be expected, to have someone waiting, to cook for someone who knew your laugh, your sigh, your stories. I got into my car, groceries in the back, and I sat there, engine off, keys in my lap, staring at nothing. And I whispered to no one, I don't want to do this part alone. It wasn't a prayer. It wasn't a plea. It was just truth. But here's the part one didn't expect. That fear, once spoken, began to lose its power. I started making small changes. Nothing grand. I joined a quilting circle at the community center. Most of the women were younger, but one, Eileen, was 77, full of sass and wore purple lipstick like it was her armor. She made me laugh. She made me feel seen. Then I started hosting Sunday coffee. Nothing big. I'd bake a pie, set out a few cups. Sometimes only one person came. Sometimes no one. But I kept the door open. I kept showing up. Eventually, neighbors started showing up too. A widowed man with a lisp and a talent for piano. A single mother with tired eyes and a toddler who colored on everything. A teenage boy who fixed my porch light and stayed for cookies. They didn't replace Richard. They didn't fill the space exactly. But they reminded me of something essential. I wasn't the only one afraid. We are all, in some way, afraid of not mattering, of fading, of sitting in a room full of furniture and memories with no one left to witness us. So I decided to be a witness for others. I started writing birthday cards, not just to family, but to people from church, from the senior center, from the past. Just a simple note that said, I remember you. You matter. And in doing that, something began to heal. I realized that maybe I didn't need someone to hold me every night. Maybe what I needed was to be part of a rhythm again, to wake up knowing someone might think of me today. And to know that I, too, could be the reason someone smiled, even if it was small. The fear is still there sometimes. It sits beside me at night when the wind howls or when the power goes out and I have to light a candle and pretend I'm not scared. It visits when I see couples holding hands and wonder what it would feel like one last time. But it no longer rules me. Because I've learned that being alone doesn't mean being empty. I am full of stories, full of mistakes, full of grace, full of meals made for two and eaten by one, full of quiet strength that doesn't ask for applause. I've learned that loneliness isn't always a curse. Sometimes, it's a companion that teaches you how to love yourself without permission. And I've learned that I am not invisible. Not when I smile at the postman. Not when I call my granddaughter and ask about her exams. Not when I light a candle just for me and eat the pie anyway. So if you fear growing old alone, know this. There will be days when the silence feels too wide. There will be nights when you wish someone would call, knock, remember. But also know, you are not done. Not done loving. Not done giving. Not done becoming. And the world, even in its busyness and forgetting, is still waiting for the quiet magic only you can offer. You are not a leftover. You are a rare vintage. And if you look in the mirror long enough, past the wrinkles and the worries, you'll find someone worth showing up for. Yourself. It was tucked behind an old church bulletin and a dried rose I didn't even remember keeping. I found it on a Tuesday. It wasn't a day marked by anything special, no anniversary, no birthday, no reason for nostalgia. I had simply decided to clean the desk drawer that had become a graveyard for forgotten things, faded receipts, broken pens, buttons with no shirts. You know the kind. I almost threw the whole bundle into the trash, but something stopped me. A softness in the paper. A familiar slant in the handwriting. It was addressed to me, but not in the way people usually wrote my name. Not Mrs., not Mom. Not even darling, as Richard used to call me. Just my name. My full name. Like someone who once knew me completely, before I was anyone else's. I sat down slowly, as if the chair might disappear under me. I opened it with the care you give to something sacred or dangerous. And then I read it. It was from Thomas. Thomas. My first love. The one before Richard. Before the children. Before the whole map of my life unfolded the way it did. We had been young, 17. Summer skin, foolish hearts, dreams bigger than the county line. We had planned to run off together, remember? To California, maybe, or New York. Somewhere with streetlights and poetry readings and jazz on the sidewalks. But life had other plans. His father got sick. He stayed. I left for nursing school. We promised to write, to wait, to not forget. And then we did forget. Or maybe we didn't. Maybe we just folded the memory into the corners of our lives and called it growing up. But this letter, This letter had never found its way to me. It was postmarked August 1973. My address, scrawled in that same boyish hand, now faint with time. And inside, he had written, "I wanted to tell you that I loved you when I didn't know what love meant. I loved you with the kind of recklessness only youth allows, the kind that thinks forever is guaranteed and goodbye is never real. But now that I've grown up a little, now that I've sat with some regret, I wanted you to know, you mattered more than I ever told you. You were the first place I felt safe, the first person I trusted with my fears. And even if you never read this, I needed to send it, because some things are too important to keep buried." I read it once, then again, and then a third time, aloud, my voice cracking on the word safe. I don't know why I cried. It wasn't grief exactly, nor longing. It was something gentler, like being remembered by someone you forgot you were once becoming. I sat with that letter for a long time. It made me wonder about all the versions of myself that had come and gone. The young girl who dreamed of writing books. The tired mother who sometimes cried while folding laundry. The widow who held her breath through the night. Each one had been real. Each one had carried her own fears, her own hopes, her own secret questions no one ever answered. And somehow this letter, this forgotten whisper from a past I'd tucked away, reminded me that none of those selves had disappeared. They were all still here, layered inside me like tree rings. What struck me most wasn't that Thomas had written the letter. It was that he had sent it, not knowing if I would ever read it, not expecting anything in return. That kind of love, it's rare. It made me think, how many words have I left unsaid in my life? How many people have I loved quietly? How many moments have I kept in my chest unspoken because I thought it was too late? That night, I made tea and pulled out my old stationery. I began writing letters not to mail, but to heal. To Richard. I wish I had told you more often that you were enough, even on the days you forgot to be kind. To my daughter, I see how hard you try. I'm sorry I didn't always say so. To myself, you were never too much. And you were never not enough. It became a ritual. Each morning, I'd write a letter to someone living or gone. A letter with no destination but my own heart. And in doing that, something beautiful happened. The past stopped being something I survived. It became something I could understand. That letter from Thomas didn't change my life in the Hollywood way. We didn't reunite. He may be gone now. I don't know. And that's okay. What it did was remind me that I have always been loved in ways I didn't notice, didn't name, didn't expect. Even when I thought I was forgotten, I wasn't. Even when I thought I was alone, I wasn't. Somewhere, someone was remembering me kindly. And now I do the same, not just for others, but for myself. That drawer? It's not a graveyard anymore. It's a library. A place where old love letters live beside grocery lists and baby teeth and postcards from lives that almost happened. It's where I keep the proof that I have mattered. To someone. To many. To myself. And when I go, I hope someone finds that letter. I hope they read it. And I hope they feel what I felt. That time may pass, but tenderness leaves a trace. That even unopened letters still carry love. And that nothing beautiful is ever truly lost. There comes a point in your life, especially after 60, when you begin to understand that the stories you once clung to so tightly don't have the same grip on you anymore. Not because they've stopped mattering, but because you've stopped needing them to explain who you are. I used to believe I was the sum of everything that happened to me. The wife who was left. The mother who gave too much. The woman who outlived the love of her life. My story was one of survival. Of losses stacked like bricks, holding up a house I never chose to build. But something shifted the year I turned 65. It wasn't a birthday epiphany. It wasn't some motivational speech or a book that changed my life. It was slower than that. Quieter. I just woke up one morning and realized I was still here. Still breathing. Still capable of more than grief. And that changed everything. There's a kind of magic in realizing you're not done yet. So I stopped thinking of myself as someone waiting to be remembered. I started becoming someone worth discovering again. Not by others, but by me. I rearranged the living room, not to impress guests, but because I wanted the morning light to fall on my favorite chair. I painted my front door a soft lavender. Why? Because it made me smile. And that was reason enough. I started saying yes more often. To walks with strangers. To community potlucks. To volunteering at the library where my hands touched books more tenderly than any hands had touched me in years. And I said no to calls that only drained me. To people who only remembered me when they needed something. To the version of myself that believed she had to earn rest, affection, or peace. I let her go. She had carried enough. At 70, I took my first solo train ride. 3 hours. No destination but a small town with a farmer's market and a bench near the water. I sat there for hours, eating peaches and writing in a journal I hadn't touched in years. I wrote things like, "You are still becoming. It's not too late to be gentle with yourself. Not everyone who left needed to stay. And that's okay." I wrote without censorship, without worrying how it would sound, without asking anyone if it was too much. Because at some point, you stop asking for permission to feel. And you just feel. One afternoon, while folding towels that smelled like lemon and sun, I realized something else. I no longer feared being alone. Because I had met myself again. Not the version others molded, the caretaker, the peacemaker, the fixer. But the woman beneath it all. The girl who used to dance in the rain. The dreamer who once sketched dresses on napkins and wanted to be a fashion designer. The poet who never showed her poems to anyone because she feared they weren't good enough. I met her again. And I told her, "I'm sorry I left you behind." And she forgave me. We cried. And then we laughed. And then we made tea. Now, I celebrate things differently. I celebrate the first night of frost with soup and jazz. I celebrate Wednesdays because they're wonderfully ordinary. I celebrate my laugh lines and the fact that I still get giddy over hydrangeas blooming. I even celebrate the aches in my knees, not because I enjoy them, but because they remind me I've walked a long road and I'm still moving. I've become my own celebration. Some days are still hard. There are mornings when I reach for a voice that's no longer here. Nights when I ache for arms that used to know how to hold me without needing to be told how. But those moments don't undo me anymore. They remind me I've lived. And that's something to be proud of. I once read a line that said, "Your heart is the size of an ocean. Go find yourself in its hidden depths." That's what I've been doing. And in those depths I found pieces I thought were lost. The courage to try again. The softness to forgive. The wisdom to let go, not with bitterness, but with reverence. Letting go, I've learned, is not always about loss. Sometimes, it's about opening your hands for something new to land. And now, I live with open hands. And an open heart. And a door that is always slightly ajar, not just for others, but for possibility itself. Because at this age, what matters most isn't legacy or perfection or even being understood. It's being authentic. Being present. Being here. When people ask me what I'm doing with my life these days, I tell them, I'm tending to joy. I'm gardening silence into music. I'm practicing softness. I no longer live to be seen. I live to see. To notice the small glories. The way morning light dances on chipped china. The way a robin sings even when no one is listening. The way my neighbor's child waves like we're lifelong friends. These are the miracles I no longer overlook. I write thank you notes to myself now. I'm proud of you for getting through yesterday. Thank you for staying soft in a hard world. I love the way you still dream. And I leave them on my nightstand. Because some affirmations are too sacred to wait for someone else to say. If you're still here, still wondering if there's life after loss, after disappointment, after the story you built came crashing down, hear me when I say, yes, yes, there is. And not just survival. Life. Colorful. Imperfect. Rich with surprises. You haven't missed your moment. You are the moment. You don't need to chase youth. You need only to honor who you've become. And in doing so, become even more. So tonight, I will light a candle not for morning, but for beginning. I will pour a glass of wine not to forget, but to remember that joy is still mine to taste. And I will whisper to myself before sleep, you chose life today. And that is everything.